Drugs have been part of society forever. Opium use dates back to 5700 BC in Europe, and cannabis seeds have appeared in archaeological digs dating back to 8100 BC in Asia. Humanity's fascination with altered states of being isn't new, so it should be no surprise that as society goes, sports will go. But while most performance-enhancing drugs are not widely recreational, one in particular ruined the legacy of the player and the life of the person simultaneously. This is what you don't know about cocaine in baseball. Welcome to What You Don't Know About Sports, where we delve into the forgotten stories, teams, and athletes of sports history and question widely held takes on today's sports. I'm Blake, and this is Matt.
Howdy.
And today we are going to tell you about a problem of society that crept its way into baseball, and that is cocaine. Very quickly, we want to give a PSA warning before we get too far into this. We are going to be talking about heavy drug use. And so if that is an issue for you, we just wanted to give you a warning before we got started. But again, this episode will cover heavy drug use. So we just wanted to give you that PSA before we got into it. Question, Matt. In your opinion, what's the most influential drug scandal in sports history outside of baseball? We're going to talk about some of baseball's today, but outside of baseball.
I've got a joke answer and a real answer. So the joke answer would be the time that Sean Merriman got 4 games of suspension for steroids, HGH, I think, at the same time that we were trying to bar all baseball players in the history of ever who had ever been in the same room as a steroid. It just was funny to me that like one dominated headlines for months on end and the other one was a bottom line, just passing note. Hey, this dude that's an all-pro 4-game suspension. Moving on for the same thing. The real answer, I think, is related to our episode today, but it's the same issue in basketball. Like Len Bias, I think, is the most influential one because you hear stories that he would have been this all-time great that we did not get to witness, and he would have been in the same generation right before Jordan, same era, right? So that's a competitor that was lost to time due to drugs. So definitely an influential thing.
Yeah, but most definitely an influential thing. And again, everybody wonders what Len Bias could have been, right? Because again, he was just this phenomenal player at Maryland, and what could have been if not for cocaine taking his life so early. So it is unfortunate that we deal with this sort of thing in society, much less in sport, because we so deeply care about sport and the integrity of sport and all of that stuff. And so when these things kind of creep in, it's like, it's this, oh my God, but like it's the same things are happening in society and nobody seems to care. That's my opinion. But
True. Moving
forward, we're going to talk about first the history of drug use in baseball, and then we're going to give you a couple of examples from the 80s when drug use was very prominent. I can't say for sure it's more prominent than today because you don't really know. History will write that at some point, but we're going to get there. So since the invention of baseball, drugs have been part of it. Tobacco and alcohol primarily way back in the day, but there is documented PED use all the way back to 1889. Okay, very early on in baseball's history. Pud Gavin is said to have used a testosterone supplement derived from the testicles of live animals like guinea pigs and dogs.
Yum.
So they're like a needle extraction and then injection. So you don't know, if you don't know who Pud Gavin is, Babe Ruth did the same thing, except he used an extract from sheep testicles and self-administered an injection, allegedly, according to an account.
Like, how do you get to that point? Like, how are you just like, you know what would make me do better here is if I could just inject what is inside of a sheep's testicles directly into
Right.
my bloodstream.
Right.
I am going to play. Like, why a sheep? Like, what made you be like, hey, that sheep is the most athletic animal I can think of?
At least use a ram. Are we? I mean, like, go Tar Heels. Are we serious? Use a ram.
No, that
better than a sheep.
no, because then you would not go to class. I don't know why you would.
No. They well, I think they went. Just
You would
wasn't real.
forget. You would forget everything you knew.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why not a horse? Like, horses are athletic. How did they get to sheep?
But
I don't understand. Like,
I don't know. I'm not sure. But that happened. Okay, that happened. So we're saying again, nothing is new, especially in sport. And drug use in baseball, and probably in sport in general, essentially followed the ebbs and flows of recreational drug use in the United States as a whole, right? If something was introduced to the United States general population, eventually, I mean, these players aren't living in a bubble, playing in a bubble. Like, they go home and they have friends outside of the sport and they have associates outside of the sport. So it's just a matter of time until whatever gets here in general makes its way into the sport. And so, and this goes back, this obviously goes back a long way. The pharmaceutical industry boom after World War II introduced all kinds of stuff: painkillers, sedatives, amphetamines, specific to baseball, greenies. If you know them by greenies, that's what was used by a lot of baseball players back in the day. But cocaine, in particular, it arrived in America pretty slowly. I would say late 80s, late 60s into the 70s, but then late 70s, like by 1980, it had exploded in America. And of course, cocaine being a stimulant, it gives you a sense of energy and alertness and elevated mood. And while I was researching this episode, I came across a Bleacher Report article, and think whatever you want about Bleacher Report, doesn't matter to me. But a writer named Dan Levy, there was a quote in an article he wrote. He said this: "Players who abused cocaine had a problem. Players who abuse steroids are cheaters." I'm torn. Cocaine obviously gives you an advantage, right? Like, based on what I just said, like in increased energy, increased alertness, elevated mood, like all of those things would on paper, in theory, mean that you're going to perform better at whatever you're about to do under the influence than you would not under the influence, in theory, right? But there's this like distinction between like cocaine users and then like Willie Mays using amphetamines, like keeping it in his locker back in the day. And so, like, I'm torn. I wanted to get your thoughts on that quote.
I mean, if he would have said like Doc Ellis popping LSD before games unintentionally, but still doing that, that Doc Ellis has a problem. And obviously the people using cocaine, you get addicted to it. That's an issue, obviously. But to just say that it didn't provide an advantage, and I get it that he's singled out cocaine there, but like you said, amphetamines were a thing throughout the 50s and 60s and into the 70s because they too provided you with a burst of energy and alertness. So when you're playing a game the day after a doubleheader, or you're playing the 8th or 9th game in a row, it gives you that energy boost that you need that maybe the pitcher doesn't need, right? Because they're on 3-4 days rest. So that's a thing. And I'm not saying that everybody used the cocaine was using it because they were looking for energy. Some of them were addicted to cocaine, right? There's just a thing that they had picked up as a habit. but they did get an advantage at times from doing that, right? So I don't know. If you're using a substance, you're using a substance. And if the substance is illegal, the substance is illegal. And you should treat all those issues the same. I don't think you can isolate it and say, nah, these guys, they're fine. But those guys, cheaters. It's like,
well, don't tell the criminal justice system that. Just saying.
True. Yeah, true.
But you're right. I mean, maybe for some players it started as cocaine use being a PED of sorts, and then it turned into an addiction. Or maybe they developed the addiction outside of the sport by just starting use recreationally, and then it crept into their playing, or maybe it didn't creep into their playing at all. They were just taking it regardless of whether they were playing, and so they weren't taking it for the performance enhancing aspect. They were taking it because they had a dependency, addiction, and so it is. I don't know, that something about that quote just like blew my mind as soon as I read it.
Yeah, there's a lot, like, because some of the guys are using it as a party drug, right? Like, and that's how they get addicted to it. But there's stories from real sport, scripted sport, whatever you want to call it, like wrestlers of the time period talk about being on the road all the time and having to perform every night, similar to a baseball player's lifestyle. And they're talking about taking painkillers because they're hurt. And that is a downer. So then to get up for the thing, you do a line of cocaine because that gives you energy, right? So there's, whether it started as a PED or it started as a party thing, I'm sure some of the players that are going to get swept up in this are using it as just part of their lifestyle at some point, which isn't great, right? Obviously, you don't want that to happen. But yeah, that quote, that's a weird quote. And I'm sure he had a reason. I'm sure he had a point, but it's a strange position to take, I think.
I thought it was interesting. So like I said earlier, we're going to cover kind of like two of the bigger cocaine baseball scandals from the mid 80s or so. The first one occurred in Kansas City. In early 1983, an undercover special agent with the Kansas Bureau of Investigation was investigating a man named Dennis Young on suspicion of selling cocaine. Just your run-of-the-mill, everyday drug investigation, I guess. The special agent set up a meeting with Young to buy the cocaine, and he posed as a businessman because, of course, every businessman does cocaine, apparently. During the meeting, Young mentions to the agent that he had partied with 3 Kansas City Royal players, and he named them. Not knowing this guy is a cop, of course, but he names the 3 players: Vita Blue, Willie Wilson, and Willie Aikens. The agent asked Young, according to testimony, if he had gotten their autographs. Just like you met a famous person, like, did you get their autographs? Dennis Young responded with this, quote, "We don't need their autographs. We got their noses," end quote. I thought that was the slickest thing. I laughed out loud.
Oh, man.
So, and of course, we know what that means, but
Dennis Young. Ooh. Dennis Young. I mean, I guess he didn't know he was a cop, but also dumbest man in the room.
No, you're not going to know that, like, the person you're talking to is a cop. That's the point of being undercover. But
that kid, I've never been a drug dealer, right? I don't know how this works, but I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that it's a good business practice to be like, "Hey, you want cocaine? You know who else I sold cocaine to?" Like, I can't imagine that is something you look for in a drug dealer. But I don't have personal experience in that situation, but I can't imagine that's good business practice.
That is hilarious. Anyway, so moving on. So the law enforcement learn that Dennis Young's supplier is a man named Mark Leibel. He's from Dodge City, Kansas, just outside of Kansas City. And law enforcement start conducting surveillance on his house, on Leibel's house. And late into the evening, early into the morning, all times of night, the surveillance sees vehicles outside of Leibel's residence registered to some pretty famous baseball players, including Wilson and Akins previously mentioned, but others also. And so on June 3rd of 1983, a wiretap was granted for Leibel's residence. And law enforcement listened to more than 100 calls per day over the next 17 days, listening to people call Leibel's residence and listening to Leibel on the phone talking to everybody. Numerous baseball players calling Leibel, hoping to buy cocaine, and not just to buy cocaine for themselves. They're not just like, give me some for me. They're like, hey, my teammate needs some. Hey, my boys in the dugout need some for after the game. And like all these, like, it wasn't just the people calling, they were ordering. It was like Amazon. I mean, it was ridiculous. So after those 17 days were over, on June 20th, Leibel's residence was searched by law enforcement. He was actually preparing to go to a Royals game, consequently enough. Yeah. And they found a bag of cocaine in the residence, but he didn't get arrested due to the ongoing investigation. And now felonies, at least in North Carolina, and I assume in this case, felonies don't have a statute of limitations. So you can hold on to that probable cause for as long as you want and charge any time in the future. And I'm assuming that's what happened here. So throughout the season, throughout the rest of the 1983 season, players were interviewed. And then after the season, 17 total people had charges filed on them by this agency in reference to this case. In particular, 4 Kansas City players were charged. Vida Blue, Willie Wilson, Willie Akins, and Jerry Martin. They were all convicted and sentenced to 3 months of incarceration. Now, Leibel was also one of the people arrested, to include his brother and Dennis Young, of course. But from prison, Leibel was interviewed and implicated a lot of people. Okay. He said he told law enforcement that he was using cocaine with players, that he was selling cocaine to players. He was selling cocaine to players for other players. He admitted to giving cocaine to a teenage bat boy at a hotel room party after a game. He admitted to delivering cocaine to the ballparks during games. He admitted that players would call him from the dugout telephone and that he would deliver the cocaine to the clubhouse before the game was finished. He admitted to using cocaine with all these players at his house. His basement was known in this circle as the Hall of Fame room because he was a legitimate baseball fan. And so he had all this memorabilia in his basement. And they would go down there and people would come over and they would use cocaine. He admitted to using cocaine with Vida Blue, and other players at Blue's apartment, at hotel room parties. He would go on road trips with the Royals as Vida Blue's guest to supply the players on the teams with cocaine while they were on road trips, all the way to California, all the way to Boston. It was, he spilled the freaking beans. He told him everything. He had one rule, and I thought this was interesting. If you came to his house and you used cocaine in the Hall of Fame room, it was free. It was on him. Anything that was taken out the door had to be paid for. Like, oh, he was. Again, apparently he was a baseball fanatic, and so like these guys are like royalty to him, and them being over at his house and using cocaine with him and stuff. He probably thought this was the coolest thing in the world, at least in the beginning. But this all started with one of his friends, Leibel's friends, introducing him to Vida Blue, who was essentially looking for a cocaine dealer at the time. And then Vida Blue opened Leibel's world to all the other cocaine users in Major League Baseball. And of course, if you just came to his house, you could use as much as you want for free. But if you had to take it somewhere, he had to deliver it, then you paid. So you could say he was a nice guy? ?
He was a good business person, in a way. I think it's interesting where this fits. So if you're a baseball fan listening to the episode, you may be familiar with the name Vida Blue. He is one of the pitchers that actually won an MVP award. So he's not nothing, not for nothing, Vida Blue. but this is the end of his career, and it's a career that kind of fell apart for cocaine. So, like you saying he was looking for a cocaine dealer, he probably was, because he only was in Kansas City for like a really short bit of his career, which means there are other dealers in other cities, and that this guy Young is just the one in Kansas City. It reminds me of Doc Ellis's second time we're going to bring him up, but it reminds me of Doc Ellis because he had his connection for LSD in San Diego that like would drop the bags off at the stadium, just give them to him during warmups. So like it's not just cocaine that's readily available. They got everything they could want from specific people. It's a wonder that if the FBI or the Kansas Bureau of Investigation was looking at this, how were they not looking at this in other cities, knowing that it was happening? It's just one of those under your nose thing that everybody's aware of. I don't know.
Yeah, of course, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation would only have jurisdiction to investigate crime in the state of Kansas. Now they could basically send information about criminal activity from other states to those states, and then it would be up to those other states to do something about it. Of course, Kansas can't make another state like enforce that state's drug laws or whatever.
Sure,
but
right.
But they could have, and maybe they did. And these are not the only two cocaine stories in baseball. I promise.
No.
These are just two of the ones that are really close together. They are very much. It's very. I'm not going to give away too much of the second one, but it is very interesting how they overlap and how one handled the situation and one didn't handle the situation in a way.
Yeah, I never knew that Vita Blue went to jail. Like I didn't know.
Short term.
I didn't know anybody had ever gone like caught prison time as an athlete with drug situations. So that was interesting. That was interesting.
Yeah. So that's the Kansas City story. Very quick, down and dirty. There's lots of you can read all kinds of stuff about. That was just a very brief Mark Leibel testimony interview statement. It's reading him talking to them about everything, all the people he's met, all the people he used with, all the things he did. It's wild. Go read it if that's something you're interested in. On that note, it is time. I have not come up with a cool pun for this segment, but it's trivia time.
Let's do
it. I've got a question, baseball related question, for Matt, and so we are going to do this. I think I just have to. I'll read the question once, maybe twice, and then like if anything is confused, I tried to like articulate it as best I could. But if it doesn't make sense, let me know. So, in this question, we are counting all outfielders as one position. Okay, so that you're not dividing left field, center field, right field. Just off the bat. So there's only 7 possibilities. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Only one player leads their position all time in Gold Gloves and is not in the Hall of Fame.
Somebody leads their position in Gold Gloves and is not.
And they are not in the Hall of Fame, all time.
Okay, which is why we're
counting outfielders. Counting outfielders is one.
Yeah.
There's of course there's 7 other positions.
Okay.
So there's technically we'll keep it there. There's 7 other positions. So you can do this. However you see fit. But yes, I'll read it one more time for the people at home. Only one player leads their position all time in Gold Gloves and is not a Hall of Famer. Who is it?
Okay. That's okay. It's bound to be a pitcher. So is the position pitcher?
No.
Okay. It's definitely not pitcher. Don't know why I thought that. That's a terrible idea.
I'll tell you this. The all-time pitch position-less Gold Glove leader is a pitcher.
Really?
Like the yes,
Whoever
the
has the
player
person with the most Gold Gloves is a pitcher.
is a pitcher. Yeah.
Who is it? Because that's not the trivia question, so it's fine. Is it Maddox?
Yes.
Is it Maddox? I know they like loved to give Maddox in the 90s. It was like, Greg Maddox is the best fielding pitcher. Give him the Gold Glove.
He has 18.
Yeah. Okay.
He had a 23-year career. He has 18 Gold Gloves. So of course he is not the answer. So yes, and don't just like, is it a catcher? Is it a second baseman?
No, I'm just gonna ask you the position in a second. All right. What team did this person play for?
So a few.
Okay.
You would know him either from playing for the St. Louis Cardinals,
okay,
or for playing with the New York Mets.
Cardinals, Mets.
Cardinals and Mets.
Cardinals, Mets. What years?
So he was drafted in 1974.
Okay.
And finished in 1990 was his last season.
Oh my God. This is so much more fun on the other side of the situation.
Isn't it though? I'm having a blast.
It is so much more fun on the other side of the situation. So Cardinals and Mets, 70s, you said 73? Is that what you said?
74.
74 through 90.
Well, okay, so yeah, technically he debuted in 74 in MLB. He was drafted in 71.
Yeah, not.
So debut in 74. Last game was in 1990.
What position did they play?
First base.
First base, Mets, late 80s, 90s. Oh my God, I've got it. Does this person do Just for Men commercials?
I think so. Yeah. Question mark.
Is this Keith Hernandez?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go.
Keith Hernandez. Yep. He has 11 Gold Gloves as a first baseman and is not in the Hall of Fame. He won an MVP award, 5-time All-Star, won 2 World Series, I think one with St. Louis and one with New York. Won a batting title, all kinds of fun stuff. Career batting average of .296. Not in the Hall of Fame. We may or may not be talking about some people's reasoning in the next segment. We will get there.
If you would have just straight up I know in the back of my head that he's not in the Hall of Fame, but if you would have just straight up asked me, is Keith Hernandez in the Hall of Fame? Like I would have been like, yeah, pretty sure. So that's interesting. Okay. Given the nature of the episode, are you getting ready to tell me that Keith Hernandez just has a huge nose? Is that what you're about to tell me?
I have never measured his nostrils before, no. But I will say that according to him, he put it to good use in 1 year in particular. And
okay, all right.
And so, but anyway, so that was again Greg Maddox, all-time Gold Glove leader at 18. The reason that I almost said there's almost 2 players who were not in the Hall of Fame that lead their positions. If I had counted all 3 outfield positions, because Barry Bonds leads all left fielders with Gold Gloves with 8, but Willie Mays and Roberto Clemente both have 12.
Yeah, and they give 3 outfield Gold Gloves regardless of position, so that's fair.
Yeah, so it's a little weird. So Barry Bonds would have also counted, but not for this episode, suckers. Okay, so to the second one, we're going to Pittsburgh. Okay, Pittsburgh, 1985. Some of you may know this as the Pittsburgh drug trials. If you don't, I'm about to enlighten you. ESPN did a 30 for 30 short on it. It's pretty good. So we're gonna talk about some of what they said and some of the stuff they didn't talk about. So it kind of all starts with a pitcher named Rod Scurry, a Pirates pitcher. He debuted in 1981. He won his first major league start, okay, in April of 1981. He was allegedly under the influence of cocaine, though. So back to the the earlier parts of the episode where we were talking about some people used it as a performance enhancer. Some people may have already been using it. I have a feeling Rod Scurry was already using cocaine because this was his major league debut, and he was under the influence during this outing.
Yeah, if there's ever a day you don't need an energy boost, it's your debut in Major League Baseball. Like, you would think you'd just be ready to go immediately. So
yeah, I don't think you would need an upper for that. So Scurry had become friends with a couple guys in Pittsburgh. One, notably, the Pittsburgh Pirates mascot, the Pirates parrot or whatever they called him. His name was Kevin Koch at the time. Not ironically, it is spelled Koch. Kevin Koch.
The Coke Man.
And we'll get there. And Koch's high school friend, his name was Dale Schiffman. Schiffman was allegedly a freelance photographer. That's what he said anyway. But after researching him a little bit and him talking to investigators after all this happened, he was mostly a partier who loved sports and drugs. So Schiffman started hanging out with the Pirates, with Koch and with Scurry in particular, and then players started learning that Schiffman could get them cocaine. So Schiffman basically became their dealers, and he would buy it, repackage it, and then he would basically deliver it to them, like he would bring it to the parks. And eventually the players would just start calling Schiffman directly. They would almost leave Koch out of it. Originally, players would have to call Koch, who would call Schiffman, but eventually they just cut Koch out of the middle. Sorry, that was not meant to be a pun. But players would call Schiffman directly, and they would bring it to him. Mostly Rod Scurry and Dale Berra, who is Yogi's son, played on the Pirates at the time. And again, Schiffman would not only deliver to the parks that they were playing at, their clubhouses, he would bring them to hotel room parties after the games and all of this stuff. So after this somewhat successful 1981 season for Scurry, he ends up going back to the bullpen. Pirates had really good pitching. They had just won a World Series in '79. And so they had pretty good pitching. And so Scurry got called up. He was a starter for the 81 season, got sent back to the bullpen in 82. But of course, he kept using because cocaine is an addictive drug. And then fast forward a few years, Scurry had a bad outing. I think he got called in as a reliever, and he threw 8 straight balls. So he walked 2 players back to back. Had a bad outing. They took him out of the game. He went back to his hotel room, probably maybe under the influence at the time, but definitely had a huge paranoia thing going on back in the hotel room, because he ended up tearing apart his room, ripping apart the television that was in the room. And he would tell people later that he was looking for snakes. He thought there were snakes in the room. He was tearing apart the TVs and the furniture and stuff, looking for snakes, like a hallucination kind of thing. And so he got sent to rehab the next day. And then eventually he was interviewed by the FBI. And following that interview, or those interviews, law enforcement now basically had a list of dealers and players who were supplying and using. So this is kind of where the Pittsburgh drug trials investigation started. But I cannot imagine the hallucinations, thinking that there were snakes, or I mean, like anything you were like anything that you were terrified of. Just imagine that for a second.
Tired of these snakes in my hotel room. I was trying to think what do they sub that line with when it's on TBS? They're like, I'm tired of these Monopoly snakes in this Monopoly hotel room. You ever?
They say Monopoly?
Yeah, because on like TBS, TNT, whenever they're showing a movie and they curse, they don't like bleep it out. They just sub it
Yeah,
in with like
they
a
changed
nonsense
the.
word. Yeah, and it can't be something close, right? So it's got to be like I don't know what it is, but Monopoly seems like it would
these
fit.
these Monopoly snakes on this Monopoly play. That would be the weird. I've never heard that. I've never seen that movie, admittedly. So, but
I've
we're
never
just
seen
gonna
any
pass.
other than that one scene, but that guy was living it 20 years before it happened. He was looking for those
Maybe,
snakes.
but yep, that director was on it. And so after this happened with Scurry and the FBI interviews him, they get all these names, and then after some sort of investigation, 7 federal indictments were levied against Dale Schiffman, a gentleman by the name of Curtis Strong. He was the Phillies chef and caterer at the time, and 5 others. The others aren't extremely relevant, but they did end up getting charged. Schiffman pled guilty. He didn't even fight it. He basically just said, "Yep, whatever. Give me what you got." Strong, on the other hand, the caterer, pled not guilty and he went to trial. During the trial, they called a ton of players. I don't remember how many. I don't remember the exact number, but they called a bunch of players in to come and talk about the state of cocaine in baseball, essentially. And reading about it, it basically just became an indictment on cocaine use in baseball, more so than Strong's actual participation in it. Like, he was the one on trial, but the prosecutors were asking the players and all the witnesses that they called uh, mostly general questions about just cocaine use in the sport, less about Strong's involvement. And Strong's attorney, Ken Renfro Jr., kind of became the star of the show. Like, he was very outward. He was very talkative, but we'll get to him too. He had some issues going on too. But during the trial, Keith Hernandez, your trivia answer, he stated that he has still no recollection of the entire 1980 baseball season due to how much cocaine he used. He actually was quoted during testimony saying that he used, quote, massive amounts of cocaine, end quote, and even played a game under the influence. He made it sound like he didn't play the overwhelming majority of games under the influence, but he used so much off the field that it just blurred everything, I guess. He said that he quit using cocaine after being traded to the Mets in mid-June, partially because of the Kansas City incident, because 4 players from Kansas City got arrested and sent to prison. And so he said that kind of could have put something in him. And he was like, maybe this isn't worth it. But he also said that at some point, 40% of baseball was using cocaine, but then kind of tracked it back later and said that it had declined extremely since 1980, again, due to the Kansas City incident. Another player that got interviewed was Lonnie Smith, 3-time World Series winner, 5-time pennant winner. He went on to say that he didn't start using cocaine until 1977, but he only used in Venezuela while he was down playing winter baseball. That's where he was introduced. Said that he only used in Venezuela because he couldn't afford it in the United States, for one, and he didn't have a dealer. And so it was too expensive, and he had nobody to get it from. But Dick Davis, one of his teammates with the Phillies in 1981, introduced him to a dealer, and then that's when it got out of control for him. One other notable player that testified, Tim Raines, 3-time World Series winner, 4-time stolen base leader in the National League, testified that he kept cocaine in a glass vial in his back pocket during games, and he only slid head first so that he didn't break the glass vial in his pocket, which is just...
I think that's the one story that everybody would know, though, from this whole deal. Is that Tim Raines slid face first into everything, just in case he needed to top off in the middle of a game. He couldn't slide feet first. That's incredible.
I
That's
mean,
incredible.
it really is like to just not only did like you could think about it in two ways. Not only did him using cocaine affect the way that he played in some ways, obviously, but simply having it on his person while he was playing changed the way he played the game. Like that's just crazy to me.
And the fact that he had to have it on his person, right? Not in his locker, not
Yeah.
back at the hotel room. It's in my pocket while I'm playing a game of baseball, potentially
Ooh.
on television in front of a local or national audience. I'm just running around with cocaine. I mean,
It was like the worst kept secret of in baseball history. It has to be.
yeah.
I mean, it really was
alongside steroids, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe. But like everybody in the United States was using. And so it was no surprise that like baseball players were using. They were making more money than most Americans. And so I mean it's not an incredibly cheap thing. But anyway, yeah, just the fact that it altered the way that he played just it's blowing my mind still. But so during the trial, Curtis Strong's attorney again kind of became the star because again he was very outward, he was very talkative. He basically kept saying that baseball was on trial here, that the real problem was not his client selling cocaine to the players, it was the cocaine problem that baseball had. Maybe he was right. But he got in a little bit of trouble. He was cited for contempt of court. He violated instructions of the judge to keep from referring to the players' immunities throughout the trial. So every player that testified about their personal cocaine use and cocaine use in baseball in general were given immunity. They would never be charged with it criminally. So he kept bringing that up, apparently, and the judge told him not to, and he kept doing it, and the judge didn't like it, so he sentenced him to 30 days in jail after an appeal. So he had to go to jail for attempting to defend his client. Down the road, though, he was later arrested for obstruction of justice and attempted bribery of a witness. It's not clear whether it was in this trial or in a different one, but he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. And his bar license got taken away. He was disbarred, so he couldn't act as an attorney anymore. And then later he would admit to having a 15-year-long addiction to cocaine.
Of course.
Like, what? What are you doing? So the trial went on. Curtis Strong was found guilty. He went to prison. I think all seven of the people charged went to prison. Some did varying time. I think Curtis Strong had like 12 years, whereas Schiffman only served or was only sentenced to 2, or he only served 2. But because you plead guilty, he got a lesser sentence. Overall, though, over 20 players were implicated in this trial of using cocaine. Commissioner, I hate this name, Uberoth. Commissioner Uberoth suspended 11 of the however many players it was, but they were all commuted. None of them missed a single game. I mean, besides the 4 that were arrested. None of the players implicated in this trial ever missed a baseball game because their suspensions were commuted in exchange for fines and Uberoth's attempt at voluntary drug testing. He tried to make all the players submit to mandatory drug testing. He basically got away with mandatory drug testing for all the coaches, all the staff, all the park staff, and all minor league players. But the players' union would not allow mandatory drug testing for the major league players, and so that didn't happen. But there was a voluntary system put in place. Some of these players were made to do the random drug testing if they didn't want to be suspended, I think. And so that was weird. But that was Uberoth's stamp, because after this trial, baseball is drug free and the problem is over and no, we have no issues here. And then of course, like it's not gone. Like they didn't do anything. these two cases seems like could not be any different. Like, this one was huge. This one implicated so many players. It was in the staff. It was in the players. It was everywhere. They were making phone calls on the dugout phones to these dealers, and they would bring them the drugs before the games were over. Like, this trial showed how much of a problem it was. The Kansas City trial was like an outside non-baseball thing. 4 players just got caught up in it, and they got arrested and sentenced. But like this one that was primarily baseball in its origin and throughout its entirety, they basically just swept everybody under the rug, even though there was a precedent of like, hey, law enforcement is not afraid to charge baseball players, no matter how much money you make or whatever, no matter what your status is. We're willing to charge baseball players for breaking the law. There was a precedent. And then this joke of a thing by Major League Baseball, they didn't do anything. They didn't do anything to anybody
at all. I mean, just to kind of commute the sentence. I guess I understand the idea. You want to move past it, but at the same time, you've got to want to get it out of the game, especially with the way cocaine was being looked at and becoming a national story and a national problem in the 80s, particularly in sports and entertainment, but also all the way throughout life. And like you said, it's not gone. If we fast forward to today, there's drug testing now, right? So, we like to think it is, but, in terms of those players, it's probably not. In terms of society, we know it's not. It doesn't get the press that it did at one point, doesn't get the press as much as some other things do, but it's still there. And it's still not great. I do have a question. Why the players needed any kind of immunity to testify? Because it's not like they were getting on the stand and saying, yes, I have cocaine in my pocket right now. They were saying, I took it from this person, I took it, whatever. And so, like, the crime, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but the crime for substances is possession. So if I'm telling you I used to possess it, you can't charge me with anything because you can't prove that I did, right? It's like, what was the immunity for?
That's the interesting part. There was exactly 0 physical evidence in the Pittsburgh drug trials for anybody, not just the players testifying. They didn't catch any of the 7 that they charged with drugs. They didn't cover any drug deals. They didn't seize anything. There is no physical evidence of this happening. All of the evidence was hearsay. It was just the player's word. And so I guess they figured that, well, man, if we're going to try and charge these dealers for dealing the drugs without actually catching them with any, other than Schiffman, they caught him with some cocaine at his house. But like, they didn't actually, like, if a drug investigation today, you're gonna send somebody, like the very first one, right? You're gonna send an undercover agent or somebody to go buy from that person. You've got that drug that this sworn officer or whoever bought from that person. You can show it in court. You can bring that baggie, you can bring that whatever, and you're like, this is what I bought from this person sitting in this room. There's no question. Like, the physical evidence is there. These 7, only 2 of them went to trial, Strong and another guy, this one went first. This one had almost all the witnesses, and the other one had like just a couple. And so the other one wasn't very eventful. But maybe they figured that if we're going to try and convict these dealers on selling drugs without ever catching them with any, for the most part, then we should probably make sure that the baseball players understand that for their cooperation, you got to come in here and you got to sit in front of a judge, you got to sit in front of the commissioner, you've got to sit in front of, national television. Like, you've got to do all these things and talk about talk about all these things about like what you've done in the past and who you're associated with and who you've seen do stuff and who you've done it with and how much. And like, I mean, all these questions about your personal life and your drug usage history is going to come up. And so they probably figured like, hey, just to make them feel better and to make them come, we just need to assure them that they'll never be charged for any of this. That's the only thing I can come up with, because again, they had no physical evidence for the actual defendants.
Right. So you got to have the evidence of the players to testify.
It's very weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to do whatever you can to get them to testify that it happened. And then that's probably what the commissioner is doing too, is I'm suspending you so that people see that I suspended you in the newspaper, but then I'm going to commute your suspension because less people will see that. And yeah, I get the dog and pony show that goes along with it. But what does it accomplish at the end of the day? Keith Hernandez tells us that it's significantly declined throughout the 80s, but do we know that for sure? Because Doc Gooden and Darryl Strawberry are well-known cases of this ruining careers into the 90s. So, does it actually go away or not? I don't know. And then, there's the questions about whether the league has anything to do with it or not, right? We still grapple with that question in modern sports about whether or not, how leagues should punish people for criminal activity and whether they should and how much and whether the team should care, and probably, right? But doesn't seem that we ever do it.
Right.
Except for a 3-year stretch of steroids in baseball. But, I don't know.
That's it. It's just interesting. The most interesting part to me, I think, is that there was a precedent of charging, like criminally charging players. And like the Pittsburgh case just failed to do that. Like it was just, again, like you said, dog and pony show. Someone was held accountable. The people who were selling the drugs to the players were held accountable. Like the day that Schiffman got arrested or Strong got arrested, they didn't go find another source, right? Like it doesn't. That's not how any of this works. Like that old I'm gonna post you on my wall commercial. Like that's not how any of this works. Like that's not how it works. So they're gonna go find it, and it's very interesting because we just had a case 3 years ago ish. Where an Angels pitcher, Tyler Skaggs, overdosed on fentanyl-laced drugs, and a team staff member, I don't remember his position,
clubhouse attendant of some kind, right?
Communication. He had a weird title. He wasn't like just an athletic trainer, like handing out greenies in the clubhouse. Like it was something kind of different. They were just friends. But like that trial is. Well, part of that trial just ended, but I think that's going to continue. And so, like, this problem isn't over. This problem is not over. It's beyond, like, the steroids thing happened. It's probably still happening, but, like, there are drugs in baseball that are killing people. And as a matter of fact, Rod Scurry, like, the person who started all this, in the early 90s, he died from a heart attack after freaking out over during a law enforcement incident. He died from a drug-induced heart attack. Yeah. Like, this could have been a time where baseball took it seriously, actually helped the people who needed the help, right? Like they're your employees, they're your cash cow. It just shows that these players are replaceable to the owner, and in any sport, but in this case also, the players are just replaceable. Like they don't care who's actually wearing the jersey. The product is going to be relatively the same, right? And so I truly don't think they care. And again, after this whole debacle, PEDs came on the heels of this, and this I don't know that this had any sort of positive effect on the steroid era, because if they had held cocaine users accountable and amphetamine users accountable, maybe some people decide that PEDs aren't worth the risk, right? Kind of like Hernandez decided, like, hey, I mean, I don't remember an entire year from using cocaine, and that wasn't bad enough to stop me. But the thought of getting arrested, or like losing my job, I can't do that. So, like, do you think this had any effect on the steroid era?
Nah, I don't think so. I mean, the idea that the clubhouse is a safe space and you're not going to get busted, because some of the things they were using obviously were not against the rules, but were absolutely illegal to be in possession of, just like any other substance. That played a role in it because they weren't worried about getting caught. I mean, McGuire was leaving supplements that were questionable just in his locker open for anybody to see in that 98 season. So no, I mean, yeah, I don't think you can make the jump from cocaine to steroids and being like, yeah, we can do it. But I think the atmosphere and the safety that players felt that they're not going to get caught. And it goes on to today. You brought up the Tyler Skaggs thing, and the guy that was supplying him testified that he's made 250 plus deals while he was in that position. The fact, not to continue to drag people's names in the mud here, but like Matt Harvey, when the Mets general manager or former general manager Omar Minaya was asked if he was surprised that Matt Harvey was involved in this investigation. No, they asked him if he was shocked that Matt Harvey was involved in the investigation, and he said, to be shocked, you have to be surprised. So in short, no, I'm not shocked. Right? like I fully understand that Matt Harvey is the kind of person that does this. And so it's still there. I mean, even with the PED thing having blown up, there's still this sense of security in the clubhouse and that you're not going to get caught. And so that, I mean, probably something should be done somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, it needs to be done. It needs to be handled in society, because if it's not handled in society, then it's not going to be handled in sport. So we can talk about that later. But yeah, so I thought those were two related cocaine stories in baseball. I'm sure there's plenty more. If you know of another one, tell us. I love this stuff, not the drugs, just the story part, specifically the scandal type stories. So we'll talk about these all day long. If you have any other ideas, send them our way. We will be sure to cover them. Send them to us on social media, email, whatever you got. And yeah, so if that is what you don't know about cocaine in baseball, and until next time, we'll see ya.
See you later. Thank you for listening to this episode of What You Don't Know About Sports. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please leave us a review, 5 stars only, and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen. If you have a great sports story, we want to hear about it. You can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WYDKAS Podcast, and on our YouTube channel at What You Don't Know About Sports Podcast. All episodes are written, recorded, and edited by us. Stay tuned for the next episode.